Welcome to Dr. Gerald Mann's signature series, You Can Begin Again. Dr. Mann is the host of the television program Real Life and the senior pastor of Riverbend Church in Austin, Texas. And now, Part 1, You Can Begin Again, after you've been left out.
Today we're going to talk about you can begin again after you've been left out. And I think David's secret is recorded in his three great Psalms. The first one, Psalm 23. We usually use it at funerals. It's appropriate for that, for grief. But I think it's a commencement psalm. I think it's the secret of how to begin again after you've been left out, excluded. Let me read it to you. It's not like it says in your King James. This is from many years of study and translating the Hebrew. If anybody here knows Hebrew, you can talk to me later, but I know a little of it. It reads like this: because the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything that I need. He has me to rest in green pastures. He leads me to fresh pools of quiet water. He restores my strength. He keeps me on safe pathways without failing. Even when I walk through the shadow of Death Valley, I am not afraid. For you, O God, are with me. Your rod and your staff, they protect me. You have prepared a banquet for me, for all of the outsiders to stand and see. You have made me an honored guest by pouring oil on my head and filling my cup continuously. I am certain that your goodness and your mercy will be with me all the days of my life, and your house will be my home forever. You can begin again, even after you've been left out. I was only 7 years old, had a brother 11 years old. I was supposed to be asleep. I could hear my parents talking in the next room. And I'll never forget Dad saying, I have this wonderful, wonderful fishing trip and outing planned, but we've got to figure out a way for me to take Wayne and leave little Jerry at home. And I remember that as though it were yesterday, and it was 57 years ago, almost. Each one of you can identify with that. Each one of you has had the feeling of being left out, of being excluded. I think the need to be included is one of our basic needs. No one ever felt more left out than King David. If you've read in 1 Samuel, you remember God tells the prophet Samuel, go to Bethlehem. There's a man there named Jesse. He has some sons. One of those sons is to become the future king. You go and look at all the sons, and I will tell you which one is the chosen one. And so he gets to Jesse's house, and he says, bring me your sons. And he brings out 7 sons, and the first one is tall and handsome and beautiful and white teeth. And he's got diamonds for eyes, and he's just a wonderful, and he's not the one. And he brings out 6 more sons, one by one. None of them is the right one. And then the prophet says to Jesse, you got any other boys? He said, well, let me think a minute. Oh, yeah, there's David. But he's a shepherd. Now, that doesn't mean much to us. But a shepherd was the lowest rung of society. A shepherd was what you became when you failed in the local biker gang, okay? It was the bottom of the rung. He lives with the sheep. He smells like a sheep. He fights bears and lions with rocks and clubs. There's not much hope for him. He's the loser of the family. But you know that David became the greatest king in the history of Israel. How did he overcome rejection? We've all had that. How did he begin again after he had been felt left out? Well, I think Psalm 23 gives us the answer. The first 11 words. Because the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything and here's the key word, need. What happened in the desert with the sheep for David was that his desert became his dessert. I thought that up all by myself. Isn't that cute? His desert became his dessert. He was forced to depend on God to be his shepherd. This is not rocket science, folks. It's real simple. If you have been rejected, you don't have to be left out forever. Let the Lord become your shepherd, because he will meet your What's the key word? Needs. It's very interesting that the leading psychoanalyst of the 20th century, I believe, was not Sigmund Freud or Jung or Adler, but a man named Maslow. And he studied, you know why? He studied healthy people. The rest of them studied sick people. He formed his idea of what makes people healthy and growing by studying healthy people. And he found that healthy people had 5 basic needs that were met. And they fit the 23rd Psalm. David, here's point 1. I got 5, so I got to hurry. David let the Lord be the shepherd of his physiological needs. Maslow said, man does live by bread alone if he has no bread. If a man is hungry and without food and nourishment and rest and replenishment, there's no need to talk to that person about achieving anything, because they do live by bread alone if they have no bread. The basic physiological needs have to be met. Listen to the first verse of the 23rd Psalm. He lets me rest in green pastures, food. He takes me to pools of quiet water, nourishment, and He renews my strength, replenishment, nourishment, rest. David learned in the desert to depend on God, to let Him be his shepherd for his physiological needs. We are a nation obsessed with gaining stuff, and it's because we've lost the simple truth that the Lord is our shepherd. And my challenge to you this first Sunday of the millennium is, make a vow. God, I want to let you be the shepherd of my physiological needs. What does that mean? It doesn't mean to take on a new regimen. It means to take on a new rhythm. Every time you get worried about how you're going to make ends meet, and how am I going to eat, and how am I going to sleep, and how am I going to rest, and all that kind of stuff, and how am I going to be provided for, remember, the Lord is my shepherd. Let God meet your physiological needs. Get a new rhythm into your life. It's not rocket science. It's simple truth. You can begin again after you've been left out if you learn to depend on the right person for your physiological needs. The second thing that David did was let the Lord be the shepherd of his safety needs. Maslow says once we've had our physical needs met, they no longer motivate us. I was at a lunch yesterday where 3 of us were talking, 3 men, about New Year's resolutions. And guess what all of us had in common? We're going to lose weight. That's right. Guess how? One guy weighed well over 200, another about 200, and then there was me. And we all wanted to, let's guess how much we all are going to have to lose. Same amount, 20 pounds. I think if there'd have been a 300-pound guy there, he said he's going to lose 20 pounds. What's that got to do with the 23rd Psalm? Let God meet your physiological needs. Let God meet your needs for safety. He said, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He talks about safety. He says, He leads me down not the paths of righteousness. In the Hebrew it says the safe paths, the ones where you don't fall off. He takes me through the valley of the shadow of death. If you've ever been to southern Israel and Judean hills, the Death Valley is Wadi Kelt. It's a huge gorge that runs out of the Judean hills down to Jericho. And it's always in the shadows. Whenever the shepherd took his sheep down there were lions and bears. It was called it was called Death Valley. Death Valley is not in Idaho or wherever it is. It's in Israel. And to go down there was he said, even though I go through the valley of the shadow, I am not afraid, because you are with me, O God. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Maslow said we have to have our safety needs met. A need for orderliness, for a pathway to travel that's dependable, and we need protection. People cannot live in fear, he says. I wonder if he'd been reading the 23rd Psalm. Let the Lord be the shepherd of your safety. You know, at the Mann house, at our home, we have learned a hard reminder this past 12 months that no matter how well we take care of ourselves and no matter how good science and medicine is, and we've had wonderful doctors, all of us are hanging by the thread of God's mercy. We've learned the hard way that we are mortal beings, that we are beings unto death. I turned 62 just before the first of the year. I've never been more aware of my mortality, of being in the autumn of my life. I've come to realize that there is no peace of mind. There is no way to overcome feeling mortal or left out except to depend on God's mercy, His rod, His staff. I talked to somebody the other day that said, I turned in the middle of a street to look a certain way, and an 18-wheeler missed me that much. Had I not turned, I would have been killed. Our lives are precarious. Let the Lord be the shepherd of your safety needs. Stop worrying. Then he goes on to say that he learned to let the Lord be the shepherd of his needs to belong. Maslow said after we've had our physical needs met, our safety needs met, we all need to belong. He said to be loved is not just to have sex. People have sex so they can belong. There's never been a promiscuous person who wasn't trying to get love. Love, belonging, is to be in a stable environment. That's why families are so important. That's why divorces shatter the very basis of a child's nature. You want to let the Lord be your shepherd this year. Let Him be the shepherd of your belonging needs, of your love needs, a place to belong. I love Robert Frost's definition of the family. He says the family is the place that when you go there, they have to take you in. You like that? I love that. The place that when you go there, they have to take you in. That's what's built Riverbend Church. We're the place that when you come here, we have to take you in. Doesn't matter how bad you've been or what you've done. Doesn't matter how dirty you are or wealthy or poor or anything else. The door's open to you. And a preacher said about 3 years ago at a conference, he said, there's a church in Austin, Texas that's full of outcasts. He said they just seine up the pond and they take the fish and the snakes and the turtles and the gars and the trash fish and the crawdads and they put them all in the same pond. And that church can never succeed. Somebody said, what do you think of that? And I said, that guy understands our theology very well. It's a place where you come here, you have to be taken in. Yeah. Let the Lord be the shepherd of your need to belong. I look across this congregation on Sundays and I see people who had no place to go. Let me just tell you a little parenthetical. I'll probably go over time, but that's okay. I can do that once a year if I want to. Delbert Johnson has been sitting right over here for about 3 years. And every Sunday he comes to church and his eyes are blood red. And you can see that he's right on the edge of his next kidney dialysis. Has it 3 times a week. He's septic and he's ill. And he sings to the top of his lungs. And he sings worse than you, Gordon. And I. He called me the day after Christmas. He said Christmas morning at 2 o'clock he got a call. There was a recipient kidney available. We've been praying for it for 2 years. Delbert is anxious to get back to church. They told him he couldn't come today, but he's doing great. Isn't that something? The Lord is my shepherd. He will be the shepherd of my safety, my physiological needs, and my need to belong. Let the Lord be the shepherd of your need to belong. Let me tell you something. People cannot love you perfectly. Only God can do that. Those of you who've tried to marry somebody to fulfill your life know that we're all broken. Let the Lord be the shepherd of your need to belong. How did David overcome being left out and rejected? The fourth thing he did was let the Lord be the shepherd of what is known as his esteem needs. Maslow said after we've been fed, safe, belong, the next cluster of needs we have is the need to have self-respect, to be able to do something, to be proud of what we do. One of the things I discovered about prisoners, inmates in prison, is that they didn't know how to do anything, and that's why usually they're in prison. They had no self-respect because they couldn't achieve anything. Everybody needs to belong to something that he can, or do something that we can achieve. You need to be able to respect yourself for doing something. And in addition to that, you need praise. Listen to David's song. You have prepared a banquet for me, he says, so that outsiders just stand in the window and look. You've made me part of your home. That's esteem. And then he says, you have made me an honored guest. You've poured oil on my head, and you've kept filling up my cup every time it gets full. Oil and keeping the cup full were symbols in David's day of being part of a family and of being praised. God was recognizing him for what he did. David worked hard. He learned how to throw rocks pretty straight, and he learned how to use a shepherd's staff, but he really got his leadership, and he overcame all of his difficulties, because he knew that no matter what happened, he was an honored guest with God. He was esteemed. I love that story when he's 16 years old and he goes up there and Goliath is threatening all the armies, and he says, I can kill the giant. And they said, what with? He said, with my slingshot. They said, well, there he is with all that armor on, and you're going to kill him. He's a man of war, and you're 16 years old. And they were all cowering, and he said, I can kill him. They said, why? He said, well, when the lion gets the lamb, or when the bear gets the lamb, I chase him down and snatch him out of his mouth, and I hit him with his rock. He learned how to do things. He developed his skills, but he had a pride of what? Let me ask you something. Could God be a partner in what you're trying to do? Could God be a partner? He let God be the shepherd of his physiological needs, his safety needs, his needs for love, his needs for esteem. Finally, David let God be the shepherd of his dream. Listen to the 23rd Psalm. He says, I am certain. I am certain. This is one thing I know for sure. I know for sure that your goodness, God, and your mercy will be with me all the days of my life. Not just all the days, but it means every second of every day of my life. And your house will be my home. I love that phrase, forever. David decided to attach his dream to God's dream. Could God be a part of your dream? Do you have a dream big enough for God? Somebody called me this week and said, I've never given a dime to Riverbend Church, but I'm going to make the largest donation I've ever made in my life. And the family made a large, generous donation. I said, why are you doing this? He said, because a couple of Sundays ago you said, preaching isn't preaching unless it calls people to do something great. And I've been thinking about that. You know, we've been blessing mediocrity too long. We are not created for mediocrity. For God so loved the world, he sent us the most mediocre thing he had, right? No. We're called to greatness. What's your dream? What do you want to do with your life? Could you hitch your dream to God's dream? That's what David did. And I challenge you on this first Sunday of the new millennium to make a new beginning right here and do something great with your life. Let God be the shepherd of your dream. Every New Year's, for 20 New Year's Sundays, I have it in my Bible, I read the chronology of Abraham Lincoln's life. Would you like to hear it again? Well, if you don't, close your ears. 1832, 28 years we're going to look at here. 1832, he lost his job. 1832, he was defeated for the legislature. 1833, he failed in business, went broke. 1834, elected to the legislature. 1835, his sweetheart died. 1836, he had a nervous breakdown. Couldn't elect anybody like that today. 1838, defeated for Speaker of the House. 1843, defeated for the nomination to the Congress. 1846, elected to the Congress. 1848, lost the renomination. 1849, rejected for land officer. 1854, defeated for the Senate. 1856, defeated for the nomination to the vice presidency. 1858, he was again defeated for the Senate. 1860, he was elected president of the United States in this country's darkest hour. Now, I added that up. He batted 28 years, he batted 15 times and got 3 hits. He was 3 out of 15. 28-year career, 200 batting average. But this is what he said just before he died. God selects his own instruments, and sometimes he selects real queer ones. For instance, he chose me to steer the ship through a great crisis. You can begin again. There are a lot of people walking around today with inferiority complexes who are saying, well, I'd have been great, but my daddy just never did what he was supposed to do, and I got outcast and rejected, and I was always little, had pimples on my face, and I just never could, everybody just sort of rejected me, and I'm going to wallow in my inferiority for the rest of my life and whine and moan. And do I need to continue? I don't think so. You can begin again after being left out. Read the 23rd Psalm. He met his safety needs, his physical needs, his need for esteem, his need to belong, and his need to dream. Think of something great you can do this year. But before you do that, I want to ask you to do one thing. In fact, I tell you what, I'll just join you, okay? Let's all bow our heads together and let's ask the Lord to be our shepherd. And what does that mean? It means to let go and let Him and let the Father who loves you more than you could ever know bring that love to your heart. Don't pray this if you don't mean it. I'm going to pray it because I do mean it. There's a lot of things I'm going to do different. About 2 or 3. But there's so many more I want to do different. But I know one thing I'm going to do for sure. I'm going to pray a simple prayer. Lord, beginning this year right now, be my shepherd. Will you pray that prayer with me? Lord, right now, I ask you to be the shepherd of my life. Again, Lord, I ask you now to be the shepherd of my life. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for Dr. Gerald Mann's teaching series, You Can Begin Again. Please proceed to the reverse side of this tape for part 2, You Can Begin Again, After Great Sorrow.